I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. Heidi Hanter-Rauch is the Sophie Board Trustee for Advocacy and Resolutions. Jody Brookins-Fisher is the Sophie Advocacy Committee Co-Chair. And Alexis Blavos is the Sophie Advocacy Committee Co-Chair.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome to all our participants. We're excited that you are with us today to talk about advocacy and getting us, many of us, ready for the Advocacy Summit coming up in October in Washington, D.C. Heidi and Lexi and I are all passionate about advocacy, both for our profession and as a competency in our profession in order to help all people have the best health possible. So our session objectives today are going to be to identify the importance of engaging in advocacy as stated in our professional competencies, identify various types of advocacy strategies, discuss the current status of health education specialists engaging in advocacy activities and the importance of advocating for public health, and discussing steps to prepare for the Sophie Advocacy Summit, as I previously mentioned. So what is advocacy? I like this first infographic because it really just shows all the different pieces of advocacy and how complex it can be and yet really how simple. And the bigger idea, I think sometimes, is as health education specialists trying to figure out what we can advocate for, what we're allowed to advocate for, and what might conflict with where we work or what might be considered lobbying. So trying to sort that all out will be the first piece of this webinar. So first, the word advocacy, actually it means one who gives voice. So the World Health Organization further defines it as any combination of individual and social actions designed to gain political commitment, support, social acceptance, and systems support for a particular health goal or program. And I think we can all see the benefit in what health educators can give to communities by giving that voice. Many of the people that we advocate for are those who either can't or won't advocate for themselves or just don't have the skills. And so that's where this fits beautifully into our competencies. And when looking at the topic of this year's Advocacy Summit with opioid prevention and treatment, again, a population that probably doesn't have a voice or isn't able to advocate on their own behalf. So the next step is to determine, are you an advocate? And probably you haven't thought of yourself as an advocate, although I think you'll see yourself in some of the following questions. Have you worked on implementing a health-related policy at your workplace or community? Have you helped draft or pass a resolution on behalf of a professional organization? And that particular question is pertinent to the work we do in Sophie by developing resolutions so that our Sophie leadership can advocate on our behalf in DC and on issues throughout the country. Have you ever had a class project where you worked on advocacy-related activities? Have you ever met with administrators regarding the importance of school health, for example? Have you ever provided public testimony at a school board meeting or a legislative meeting? Have you voted in an election or forwarded health policy information to another student or colleague? So all of those pieces are advocacy, and really the question for us is health education specialists, if we're not going to advocate, who is? The idea that it takes committed people to lead the charge. And even in our busyness, again, remembering this is one of our core professional competencies. And the quote by Margaret Mead, which we all have heard and I know I personally love, is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think in our profession and in looking at the climate of our country overall now and in the next several years, we have a voice and we're going to need to use it in order to make public health part of the agenda. And again, the idea is we can't complain if we're not going to make it better. We hear that about voting all the time, and if you ask if people voted, they say they haven't voted, and then they want to complain. And really, that is the bottom line, the first step that we can do in order to make sure that our voices are heard. So definitely taking part in that political process by being a registered voter would be the first step. And then, again, getting involved at a professional level, and we'll talk about how to do that later in the webinar. And so, again, just some final comments, which might seem a little silly because, yes, this is the Lorax from Dr. Seuss, but really the messages are sometimes simple but so important. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And really, everyone, it's like people think it's like, that they're playing not it, and nobody wants to do it, but we really need to do it, and we're really called to do it ethically with our professional responsibilities. So be bold enough to use your voice, brave enough to listen to your heart, and strong enough to live the life you've always imagined. And hopefully part of that is in your professional career and to be that voice for the voiceless as you move forward in your programs.
Thanks, Jody. This is Lexi. I'm going to continue on with our webinar. Just to pull off of Dr. Seuss, that small quote, my 5-year-old niece seems to understand that and the importance of moving forward. So for those of us who are here to help make the world better for all of our 5-year-old children in the country, the kids know we need to do it. So we need to kind of move on and help too. So to celebrate, though, we have come a long way. Remember when you could smoke on an airplane? As I look at this image, I remember myself as a young girl, probably around 7 or 8 years old, getting on a plane, and you're just in this giant aluminum tube with recirculated air, and there's people smoking all over the place, and how difficult it was to breathe at that time. That's something that really stuck with me. So we've come a long way. You know that aviation doesn't allow us to smoke in airplanes anymore, which is fantastic. I know some people have tried to use jewels in those settings, but there's also laws against those. But remember when we could also smoke in other places, like bars or restaurants? I was also a waitress myself in college, and I would come home from work just smelling of smoke, not even the grease of the food that the restaurant sold, but the smoke of the people who were there having dinner. So we have made a lot of strides, and this has only happened because of passionate advocates like you and me who stood up to big tobacco and stood up to Congress and asked for these big changes. Sometimes these changes we see at national levels, like Clean Indoor Air Act, and then other places we have to look a lot closer and work with our local legislators. For example, in the county of Portland, where I live in New York, we have a tobacco 21 law, but you can go to the county next door and they don't. So sometimes what we have in place is national level, and sometimes the regulations and things we need to help us to help people have healthier lives can be closer. So never think that advocacy is only national. Indeed, most of the changes that we can make in the world and in our own communities are going to be much closer to home. Think about current policy changes regarding tobacco use in schools. So here's an example of a sign. Welcome to our tobacco-free school. My college campus actually updated our signs to say, welcome to our tobacco and nicotine-free school. in order to actually cover products like Juul that are not considered tobacco. And, some of us on this call might have gone to college when your professor was actually allowed to smoke in the classroom. So we certainly are not allowed to use tobacco products inside buildings like that anymore, and especially in a school setting where individuals are there to learn. But tobacco use, while one of our, I think, historical wins around advocacy is talked about often, there are other areas in which we've had great wins. Think about whether or not your community has helmet laws that actually protect people's brains while they're riding motorcycles or riding a bicycle. Last year, the Advocacy Summit was focused on gun violence prevention, and the other picture is of a small child playing with a gun. Well, while we haven't banned assault-style weapons at the national level, there are regulations and there are rules on how you're supposed to protect weapons in your home so that it makes it less likely that a child's going to get a hold of those things. So advocacy has a lot of wins under its belt, specifically within public health. But why advocacy training for health educators? So the current responsibilities for health education area 7 is to communicate, promote, and advocate for health education, and the profession. This training is vitally important, for the examples that we mentioned before, but the other side of that is while it's something that we are supposed to be doing as professionals in this field, not everyone knows how to do it because not everyone has had a class in which someone taught them what this is and how you do it. Most of us are participating in advocacy efforts every day and don't realize that's what we're doing. If you write a letter to the editor about something important to you, or you send a note to your congressperson through email, or you go to your local city council because you want there to be healthier or safer sidewalks. So all of those things are important. We don't always know that we're working towards advocacy, but indeed many of us are. So training will help each of us be able to be more focused, be able to advocate in the right ways and with the right person, and figure out how it fits into our lives and our professional jobs. So as health education, health professionals, if we're not going to advocate for health programs, policies, and resources, who is going to do that? Who do we leave that up to? This is indeed one of the most important things that health education specialists, health professionals can do in their lives, is advocate for those that don't have voices, that don't have power, or that don't know how to actually advocate. So if no one else does it, who's going to do it but us?
So thank you, Lexi. This is Heidi, and I am going to cover the last part of our webinar. So Lexi had posed the question, if we aren't going to do it, then who? So our past trustee for advocacy and resolutions for Sophie, her name is Dr. Amy Thompson, and she had conducted some research in the past, and this was a survey of individuals who were CHES certified. And you can see that a number of people were practicing different types of advocacy-related behaviors, but still, many of us were voting, but then look at how that drops off when you think about those who actually took that next step and contacted somebody in public office, so made your educated opinions about a health topic known to others. That was less than half of us. And then even fewer were providing policy-related information to others. So if you look at that, you see even as self-reported individuals who are health educators and know this is one of our responsibility areas, still very few were practicing in this responsibility area. And so we need to do better as a field in training our next generation in this important skill. So this is a little bit more of the research that the data, the outcomes that they discovered, and you can see very few of us have done, so less than 10% have done things like testified at a formal hearing, and Jody was mentioning that as one of our advocacy options. So how many of you have ever traveled to your state house or even your local school board or anywhere else and provided your educated opinion? So we really need to be practicing these types of skills with our students as we are training them, the next generation of public health educators. But additionally, we need to be participating in continuing education opportunities that are provided for us so that more of our population can be educated. So you can see we have quite a ways to go in this area as a profession. So what can we do specifically to influence policies that promote health? Well, first of all, we can really educate others about the need for primary prevention, especially when it comes to funding. A lot of times our legislators, regardless of whether you're talking about the local level, the state level, the federal level, the people who tend to be in charge in a lot of these areas right now are very focused on economics and the wealth of a state or a community, which is great, but we as public health educators and advocates need to help them better understand how what we do, if you put the money toward our services up front, how much money we can save on the backside. And there is so much more of that data available now than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we need to do a better job about really promoting who it is that we are, what we do, and how funding things that are primary prevention related can really save us quite a bit of money in the end game. We also need to find candidates that agree with our views, and we need to support them. So I know often, especially in this political environment that is full of conflict, sometimes it's scary to step out into that zone and say that, all right, I'm going to get involved in local politics or state politics or even federal politics. But it's important that we do that, and we're not saying that you're going to do that on behalf of your employer. You don't necessarily wear any of your professional garb when you do that. You don't wear your name tag from your organization. You don't have to wear clothing that has your logos on it. You have the right to do this as a private citizen, and we need more of our health educators to be taking on that role. So finding those candidates who support public health and health education and the funding for what we understand is so important. And we need to give them that support. So whether that is knocking doors for them, whether it's donating money for them, making phone calls, whatever those needs are, we need to be actively engaging in this process. We cannot sit back and just hope for the best, because as we've seen, that the best is not occurring right now. And we also need to train others to be health advocates. So those of us who are in academe, we really need to put that burden on our shoulders, and we need to do a better job of training the next generation to better understand policy, to understand how policy works, and to better understand exactly how we can change policy, so that advocacy piece. And then additionally, all of us who are engaged in SOFI, we are trying to provide opportunities through webinars such as this, so we're thrilled that you're on here today, but we need to do other trainings as well. So if you are joining us from wherever across the country, talk to your local SOFI organization, your local chapter. Tell them you're interested in advocacy trainings. When you go to your regional or your state conference for your SOFI chapter, they always send out those evaluations and ask what you're interested in hearing about next time, and tell them that we need more advocacy-related training. So we have that responsibility as professionals to provide this training for other professionals as well. So how else can we promote the health education specifically? So on the last slide, I was talking more about policy that impacts health, and then what about our profession? Because if you've been paying attention in the profession recently, you know that there was a lot of excitement around the Affordable Care Act. There was an emphasis on prevention within our healthcare system like we had never seen before. But then suddenly there was this language in there about community health workers. And so I don't know if you've experienced this on the ground in your communities, but one thing I've seen here in my state is that sometimes people think that we are community health workers, and I have to do a lot of education for people about the difference between a community health worker and a health education specialist. So, and Sophie has some really nice tools on that to help you tease those apart and explain that to others, some just one-pagers, some visual diagrams. So that's one thing I've had to do to try to help promote the profession in this in my region, in my area. Some other things that you can do, become certified. So either do CHES, MCHES, or CPH credential. You know, if we can really get those of us in the field to promote the credential, get a higher percentage of us who are credentialed, then it's easier for us as the profession to go to those who do the hiring in the field and say, we want more of the job announcements to say CHES, MCHES, or CPH is required for a job. We've really been pushing them to have the statement with job openings that CHES, MCHES, or CPH is preferred, but we would love to be able to take that next step so that we are making sure that the people who are taking these public health education jobs, they are well trained in this area. So get your certification. If you don't already have your certification, please really consider getting the certification that's appropriate for you. Second, by getting the word out to others about our profession and what we do. Who are we having conversations with about health education, public health, the roles that we fill? I notice, and my students come back and report to me often too, that when they say they're a public health major or a public health education and promotion major, people are like, what is that? You know, what do you do? What are you training to do? And they might think that it's a health inspector. I've had some people think that we just do health inspections. Well, that's very different from what probably almost all of us are doing in this field, though that is one role within public health. So getting that word out about our profession and really talking to even, school counselors, or if you are a student who is participating on this webinar, go out and talk to other students. Talk to people who go to your old high school. Talk to your classmates, your roommates, the people in your dorms or your apartment buildings, and have conversations with them about your major and why you love your major and all the different things that it trains you to do. So really talk up our profession and engage others. Start to get that word out there about who we are and what we do. And then by advocating for help to administrators and legislators. If you see something in your environment that needs to change, so Lexi was talking about, I think it was Lexi was talking about how far we have come related to tobacco policy. We absolutely have, but I will tell you a lot of our policies, for example, in workplaces or on college campuses, we weren't prepared for the Juul and e-cigarette phenomenon that we are seeing now, and our policies weren't very clearly written to make sure that those are banned on our campuses or our work sites. In addition, so if that's something that you are seeing around you and you are concerned about the health impact of that, then talk to the people who have the power to make those changes. So whether that's your school administrators or your supervisors at work, your HR offices, or if you want to go further and you want to work on a ban of the different flavors for the juice of the Juuls, then talk to your legislators. We have seen in Michigan, where Jody is, her governor just said in the state of Michigan, as of right now, we are no longer going to have available in this state the flavors of juice, so the stuff that goes in the Juul pods. We're not going to have those available in the flavors that are designed to market toward kids, so things like cotton candy and candy apple and mango, guava, whatever it is. And then New York actually just made that announcement, I believe either yesterday or today, that they're going to do the same thing in New York State. So we have those opportunities. This is a teachable moment for us, and we need to make our voices heard. And along that same line, while we're talking about the e-cigarettes and the Juuls, I've had some people approach me as an advocate because the public health faculty here, we've been doing the rounds on some of the local media talking about the dangers of vaping. And so we've gotten some pushback from individuals, and they say, well, it's why are you so worried about vaping when there are, guns that are killing thousands of people, and, you're not seeing all of a sudden these policy changes coming about with that. And I say, absolutely, you're right, but in public health, we will take the moment that we have right now where suddenly it's in the news, it's in the media about the dangers of vaping, and we will run with that, and we will utilize this moment where there's a lot of attention on it to make our advocacy effort known. We will talk to the people in power about what we can do to change these health outcomes, and we will push for that policy. And then you're right, we also need to be working on gun policy, and we are, but that one seems to be a much longer fight potentially. So don't think that we aren't pushing for those types of policies as well. But again, it's not a zero-sum game. We can't focus on only one thing or change one policy at a time. As health advocates, we are working in many different realms. So keep raising your voices and keep pushing. Often advocacy is a very long path. So then those of us who are very active in advocacy, we need to be mentoring others as they enter health as a health-related field as a career choice. So, for a long time, I think those of us in the classroom, we were afraid to kind of talk about maybe politics or some of the political issues because we don't want to be divisive. But at the same time, if we aren't discussing these issues, then we aren't really doing our job as mentors to help educate our students in the next generation about, how they need to be advocates. And so the way that I handle that in the classroom is typically say, we all have different political perspectives, and that's completely fine. In this classroom, I'm going to talk about the public health perspective, which is the data and evidence-driven perspective. And here's what public health has to say about this issue. And so then I can use that as the examples for the times when I'm talking to local media about the dangers of vaping, or I'm going to the State House to push for stricter gun laws in the state of Indiana, or whatever, fill in the blank, and then I can always talk about how that links back to public health as a profession, and I'm not necessarily trying to make it political, but to change policy, we have to understand politics, and we have to work within the realm of politics. And then lastly, by tooting our own horns. So we have to do a better job, and this doesn't come naturally to a lot of us because we as a field tend to be very service-oriented, so we are trying to help others, so that tooting your own horn doesn't come naturally to us maybe, but we have to get it out there, the great successes. When we have a success in public health, whether that be an advocacy success or some type of student success, we need to talk to others about that. We need to make it clear what it is that we are doing to change our communities and help others better understand, and that's part of really promoting our profession. And so we have to think about that in terms of I'm not just promoting myself, but I'm promoting what I am doing as part of this profession and how it's impacting others. So really making sure that we do that as appropriate. So what are some ways that you can advocate? That data that was collected by Dr. Amy Thompson and some of the others, we saw that the vast majority of us are voting. And if you are not registered to vote, if you are a student who is on here and you need to make sure that you register for absentee ballots or you need to get registered to vote, absolutely make sure that you do that as soon as possible. We have some very important primaries coming up. There will be some elections likely in your community, so make sure that you are prepared for that. Secondly, write a letter. And I will tell you, there's this little picture of the ResistBot icon up there. I absolutely love that device. It is a simple text message that I send through the ResistBot. It's just a texting app, and they will take my information, my message, they will link it to it's at the federal level, but my House of Representatives member as well as my 2 senators, based on my home address and zip code, and I can develop the body of the letter, and then they will create the opening and the closing and turn it into a formal-looking letter that will be sent off to my legislators. And then there's a new function in this. If you haven't used it before, you really should look into it, where if you meet a certain criteria, so you have a certain length within your text, it will ask, would you like me to submit this to your local paper as a letter to the editor? And so a couple of times I've said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So about a year ago, I did have a letter to the editor that was published in the Indianapolis Star, which is our local Indianapolis paper. And then more recently, I had another one that I didn't even realize it had been published in the paper until a colleague walked down the hall and said, hey, I saw your letter to the editor about gun policy and telling our senators to get back to work and pass policy. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know. So ResistBot is a really helpful tool, and if you're not signed up for it, I would recommend that you do that. And then if you feel confident enough, participate in public testimony. And, you don't have to be you don't have to know everything there is to know about a topic to step in front of a body of legislators and offer public testimony. And if you've ever been to public testimony, you will see that a lot of people that are standing up there offering their opinions, those opinions are not based in fact at all. So if you can go in with some evidence base, with some facts to support what it is that you're saying, and then push that a little bit further by giving a personal story that is relevant, that can be very strong. And it can help sway some of your legislators. So if that's something that, if you are able at all to offer public testimony and speak in front of other individuals, go for it. And if you want to start small with, local school board meetings, something like that, start there and then work your way up. But public testimony is a great way to get involved. Meet with your administrators or your legislators. Get to know them, talk to them about policy, and let them know that you are an expert in this area and that you are open to talking to them in the future. So if a health-related concern arises, that, let them know that you are available and you would love to be part of that conversation. So get to know them ahead of time so that then when you're contacting them related to advocacy, they already know who you are and why it is that you have the background that they should hopefully listen to you and at least hear what you have to say. Build up a relationship with the media. I know not all of you are in situations where you have a communications team that says, hey, vaping is a big story right now. Do you want me to pitch this to the local media and see who bites? Most of us in universities, we probably have that. If you do have a team like that, get to know that person or individuals. Tell them what are your areas of expertise and let them know that you are willing to talk to the media about topics or hot topics that come up related to that. If not, you still have the opportunity to go on to the web pages, the social media pages of a number of those local media organizations. You can reshare stories that promote a public health perspective. You can comment on those, and that can be really helpful, especially for those of us who are making the media circuit and offering advice to people. I know when we went on to the local news programming and we were telling people they really should stop vaping, we got some really nasty comments from the owners of vape shops and pro-vape groups that are somehow making money from this. But it would be really helpful if pro-public health people got onto those types of sites and provided some evidence or offered the counter to those negative comments. So that can be helpful even if you're not the person who's in the media. Definitely work at forming coalitions. We do a lot of that in public health, working with others across the aisle. The more people we can get involved, the better. And then, you can also participate in other forms of social media. So doing your own blogs or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever that might be to send out those pro-public health messages there's a lot of misinformation out there, and if we could do a better job about sharing accurate information, that would benefit all of us. So in order to be an effective advocate, you do need to have reasoned passion. You have to be passionate about whatever it is that you are advocating, but at the same time, you have to keep your calm and your composure, and sometimes that's hard, especially when people are throwing misinformation and downright lies at us as their counterpoints. We can get very frustrated with that, but we have to maintain that reasoned passion. We have to have a basic understanding of politics. I know sometimes with my students, I'll be working with them on advocacy topics, and I'll say, okay, what is it that you want to change? And maybe they want to, recycling pickup is not available in their neighborhood, and they really want to change that and have it available. So they say they're going to contact their U.S. senator, and they don't have the understanding of really looking at the level at which the decision is made and then who to contact related to that decision. So we have to have a better understanding of who controls what in this country, so who are the people to whom we should be advocating, and then also understanding the process of policy and how it's proposed and passed and enforced in this country. So then we've already talked a little bit about how we need to do a better job of training people in the practice of advocacy. And then we have to stay current. And I know sometimes it's so hard. We just want to unplug because, some nights I feel like it's so distressing to watch the national news or even the state news. And I just want to unplug and not even pay attention. But we can't really do that as health advocates. We have to pay attention to what are the issues. So we need to be watching the news. We need to be reading newspapers. We need to be following our local community chats online to see what's happening around us. We cannot put our heads in the sand. And then to develop your skills on your particular issue. So like with the Advocacy Summit that's coming up, if you are planning to attend, and we hope you are, there will be lots of opportunities for you to hear more about the skills parts of advocacy, so developing those skills and sub-skills that we need to be effective advocates, and then you also will develop more training on how to talk about opioids specifically. So it's a really good way to train people who maybe haven't had training in the past. And then, a keen sense of timing. I talked about how individuals are coming up to me and saying, well, why this big movement on vaping all of a sudden when guns are killing so many people? That's the keen sense of timing, right? Yes, we will keep working in the area of guns, but right now is a moment where we can really push for anti-vaping policy, and we're going to do that. And then additionally, we need to really practice perseverance, because advocacy can be a very long road, and we need to really stick with it, and that can be hard at times. So thinking about the different levels of advocacy, if you're new to advocacy, just start with your friends and family. Talking to your friends and family about public health, health education, things in our environment that we need to change or that are public health related. So for us, an example, the Red Line just opened in Indianapolis. This is really our first advance in public transportation in a very long time. So what are we doing on campus? We're going to host an open session where students get credit for attending, and we're going to offer continuing education credits for CHES and MCHES individuals, to have experts who do urban planning come in and talk about how something like the opening of a new bus line that's a rapid transit bus line can really impact the health of a community, and how urban planning is tied to health and health outcomes. So start at the level where you are comfortable, and then build your way out all the way to the federal or even the international level. And to do that, you have to really have an understanding of the legislative process. And I know many of you have probably forgotten your high school government class, if you had one, or when you last studied civics in maybe middle school or early high school. But we do have to understand the bicameral process. We have to understand how we can get a policy passed through at the state level or the federal level, and how those two processes mirror each other, but who's the appropriate person to get to take forward policy in my state, or who are my senators and my representatives. We really have to have a good understanding of that, so that we can figure out where are the pressure points where we can really practice our advocacy. So a couple tips if you do take a meeting with your decision maker. So obviously the KISS principle, keep it simple. You want to go in with a fact sheet, make sure that you have discussed your talking points, and stay with those talking points and stay focused. But you also, at the same time, you don't want it to sound too canned. So if you have a personal story that can really tie in, that's great. But keep it simple. They'll have a very limited amount of time. It's most likely you'll probably meet with their staffers. You might not. It depends whether you're going to the federal level or a local or state level. Some of our legislators I know here in the state of Indiana, they do come out and meet with us when they are in session, and they will talk directly to us. If you go to the federal offices, a lot of times you're talking with staffers. So it's a little bit different. But always, keep it simple. Have your facts straight. Have your leave behind. That's your information sheet to leave with them. You're always going to be on time, polite, and patient. Some of the offices are not as friendly to us as others. That's okay. We meet with them anyway. And we are always polite and professional. And they may keep us waiting. I've had that happen to me before, where they left me sitting in the waiting room well past the time I was scheduled to meet with them. But you know what? I sat there and I waited, and I was professional, and I maintained that professionalism when I met with the staffers. And if you go in a group, which many of you will, if you are participating in the Advocacy Summit, you will introduce each person and talk about their connection to the policymaker. So Hi, my name is Heidi, and I live in your district, and I met you at an open forum in June of 2018. We had a conversation about increasing background checks for gun sales, something like that. So just a couple other tips. We talked about trying to make sure that you make it personal if you can. So talk about how it's influenced you or a family member. Definitely stay focused, and we will help you practice with these talking points and give you some ideas before we head off to the Hill at the Advocacy Summit. So we will make sure that you practice each of these steps that we are offering as tips. You will go through that as a group. You will do lots of practice, and when you walk into your legislators' offices, you will feel confident in your ability to be successful. So does anybody have any questions for us? So with politicians who oppose evidence-based health programs or policies, would it be more effective to try to change their view or their constituents? Jody and Lexi, feel free to jump in as well. But for me, I would say it depends. It always depends, right? What is the issue, and how strongly does that politician feel about their current position? So if you get the sense that they are a little bit wishy-washy and they're a person who will listen to evidence and data and personal stories, then go straight for that politician. If it is somebody who is very adamantly opposed to your position, then I think often there's strength in numbers, right? So the more people you can get to contact their offices, meet with them, and really push, it gets harder for them to maintain that stance if they have the majority of their constituents saying that they feel the other way. So I think it depends on your issue and it depends on your politician. Jody or Lexi, was there anything else you wanted to say about that one?
Yeah, this is Jody, and I would just add in that there are some things that your politician's never going to give on. They have their core belief systems as individuals, and even though they've been elected by us, they're not going to change their beliefs or values on a few core topics. And know what those are, and know that you probably aren't going to change those. And again, it's sort of like that tempered, that kind of pacing yourself that Heidi referred to, of just knowing that you're not always going to make change their mind, and it can get frustrating, but it's still important work that you keep at it. The other thing is as Heidi mentioned, it's still important, even if it's something they don't agree with or they might not change their mind on, to hear from you. Because I would say, for example, right now with the temperament of the country regarding guns, now more than ever, I think people that ordinarily would not vote for certain things are saying, okay, well, I am amenable to stronger background checks. And that might have not happened even a year ago. So the more people they hear from their constituents who vote for them, the better, especially in an election year.
This is Lexi. I will also add the importance of remembering that advocacy is a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. So go back to our health education, health promotion, trans-theoretical model, theory, stages of change. Sometimes meeting with your legislator is just about raising their awareness to move them to the next step. The next time you meet with them, it might be getting them to actually think about what that policy might look like or how that might impact their community. So every little thing that moves a legislator forward or an organization forward is a win. But remember, things typically don't just change overnight. Most organizations aren't a private college where the president can say, go do this, and it happens. There's usually governing bodies and committees and people who work together. So with the specific question that was asked, whether or not you should focus on the politician or their constituents, I say you do both. If you have someone who opposes, you're going to need to have allies and support in order to get that legislator to change their mind. So I say that you focus on both of those things. You work with the people in their community, their constituents, and then you also have conversations that help move that legislator through the stages of change.
Mm-hmm. And if they refuse to budge, we talked about the advice, get involved and try to elect somebody else. So work for somebody who's willing to run for the office, or maybe you're willing to run for office, who will be supportive of public health and the policies that we need put in place. So it looks like Anna asked, can we give more information about the CHES? Yeah, I would recommend that you go to incheck.org website. You have to have a certain amount of education in the health education specific areas, and then the exam is offered every October and April. And I do recommend, if you are a student, go ahead and take it as a student, because it is definitely much cheaper. Look up who your senators and your representative would be. And then look for their voting records ahead of time. So prepare yourself for the conversations that you want to have with your legislators. Know what they tend to support and what they don't. That just helps you go into your meeting very prepared. So you have another resource there if you're interested. And then just a final thought, the time is always right to do what is right. In public health, sometimes it feels like maybe it's not the time. We have too many uphill struggles, but that's not the case. We have to continue pushing through, and we will get to a time where things are a little bit easier.
On behalf of Sophie, thank you to all of our presenters and to all of our participants today. And this ends our session for today. Thank you for joining us.